Hello, hello, hello. How's it going, lads? Welcome back to another podcast. We're on podcast number 4 now. Flying through them, so we are. Just before we get into today's one, lads, if you want early access to all of these podcasts and all of my videos, you can sign up to my Patreon, which I'll have linked in the description below. So a little bit of background about what we're going to talk about today. So, we're going to be talking about a specific group of British constables that arrived in Ireland in August 1920. They became well known for their drunkenness, murdering of innocent people, and looting and pillaging the country. Tom Barry himself said that these men were the worst group of British forces to ever step foot in Ireland. The unit of men we're talking about is the Auxiliary Division of the Royal Irish Constabulary, better known for their nickname, the Auxies, or also known as the ADRIC, Auxiliary Division of the Royal Irish Constabulary. So who were these men, and why were they in Ireland? So before we get into that, I'm going to read you the official British Army records, written in 1921, describing who the Auxies were, essentially. During September, the Auxiliary Division of the Royal Irish Constabulary was formed, and companies began to be distributed to the areas. This force was formed of ex-officers and was intended to stiffen the RIC by the infusion of companies comprised of men of experienced and proved capability. The force was commonly spoken of as the Black and Tans, although the term was originally applied to the recruits of the regular RIC from the fact that they were originally clothed partly in khaki and partly in the black RIC uniform. The efficiency of the companies varied a great deal, according to the character of their company commander, and although the discipline was not good at first, there is no doubt that they played a great part in quietening of the districts of where they were stationed. The outrage which was raised against them in the press and by certain members of Parliament, though ostensibly based on certain excesses, really had its origin in the fear which they instilled into the Irish rebel terrorists who failed to terrorise them. Irish rebel terrorists. Propaganda in Britain, you say? What a shocker. Let's start with why the Auxies were sent to Ireland, okay? So if you have listened to podcast number 2 about the Black and Tans, you'll know that the Tans arrived in March 1920. They were reinforcements for the Royal Irish Constabulary to bring the fight to the IRA. The RIC were struggling to gain control over the IRA due to their guerrilla tactics, so they needed extra men, i.e. the Black and Tans. Now, the Tans were definitely effective, however the IRA were still uncontrollable. The British forces were struggling to gain the upper hand. So what did they do? Well, they recruited even more reinforcements, and this second round of reinforcements became the Auxies. Here's an advertisement that was put out all over Britain, which read the following. Join the Corps d'Elite for ex-officers. Join the Auxiliary Division of the Royal Irish Constabulary. Ex-officers with first-class records are eligible. Courage, discretion, tact and judgment required. The pay is £1 per day and allowances. Uniform supplied. Generous leave with pay. Apply now to the RIC recruiting offices. £1 a day. That was unbelievable money back then, and about double what a Black and Tan was paid. Let's talk about who these men were. Most of the records of the auxiliaries were destroyed when the British left Ireland, so the exact list of names and personal details are very minimal. However, there is one important qualification that these men needed, and that differentiated them from the Black and Tans and the regular RIC. All of these auxiliaries were officers in the British Army from World War I. This is an important factor to note. These were highly experienced men, competent, skilled soldiers. These were officers, not just some randomers they picked up off the street. These were known as an elite force. The men began to arrive in Ireland in August 1920. And although they looked slightly different than the Black and Tans, they often got lumped in under the Black and Tan name. The item of clothing that mainly differentiated them from Black and Tans was their hats, believe it or not. They wore these Scottish hats called tam o' shanters. Kind of a ridiculous looking hat that leaned off to the side and had a little ball on top. Why they wore these particular hats, I've no idea, but they were commonly worn by the Scottish infantry serving on the Western Front in World War I. Another interesting style choice that differentiated the Auxies from the Tans was their gun holsters. They wore their holsters slung really low on their hip, kind of like what you'd see in a Western movie. So let's talk the numbers of men. So from the records we have today, 2,214 men signed up for the Auxiliary Division. However, some men enrolled but never actually arrived in Ireland. So it's estimated that 2,131 men actually arrived in Ireland and fought in the war. Now these men varied massively though, as men were leaving the Auxiliary Division constantly and Britain had to re-recruit more men to replace them. They say for every 3 men that joined the auxiliaries, 1 left before the end of the war. And that's not to mention the amount of these men that were killed in the war. The auxiliaries formed in companies and dispersed all over the country. Each company usually consisted of about 80 men or so. The birthplace of the 2,100 men probably won't surprise you. It's very similar to the Black and Tans, I guess. 77% born in England, 10% born in Ireland, 9% Scotland, 4% Wales. The Irishmen involved were mainly from Ulster, and they were men that went and fought for Britain in World War I and earned themselves officer status. Let's chat about the ages of these men, right? So there's a wide range of ages in this division, just like the Black and Tans. The most common age group were men born between 1895 and 1899, which would have made them 21 to 25 years old, young men. The majority of the rest of the men were in their late 20s and early 30s. However, there was this contingent of men, about 50 to 60 of them, that were even younger than all of these, coming in at about 16 to 20 years old, literally only kids. And a common question with these recruits is, were they criminals? The straightforward answer to that is no, they weren't. However, there has been studies done to show that there was a few men, like 3 or 4, that committed crimes in Britain, such as murderers and lootings and stuff like that. And then they were drafted into the auxiliary division. But this is a severe minority. The majority of these men were just regular officers in the British Army with no history of crime. So let's have a little look at a timeline of the auxiliaries, right? So I know I said they started arriving in August 1920, but it's actually, to be factually correct, it's the 27th of July, right? So 27th of July, the first recruits arrived in Ireland. They resided at the Curragh, and there was no one in charge of these men. So for about a month, they were just absolute chaotic and no organisation whatsoever. 1st of September 1920, Frank Percy Crozier was put in command of the Auxies, and these men were then moved from the Curragh to Beggar's Bush Barracks in Dublin. November 1920, the Auxies were supplied with Crossley tender trucks to enhance their mobility and to give them the upper hand against the IRA, who generally had to walk or cycle. Now, November was an absolutely hectic month. 21st of November, you had Bloody Sunday, right? So that morning in Dublin, Michael Collins' squad took out 14 men in the city, some of whom were members of the British intelligence network in Ireland known as the Cairo Gang. To get revenge, the Auxies stormed Croke Park during a football game between Dublin and Tipperary. They opened fire on the crowd and the players. They killed 14 people and injured about 60 to 100 people. Exactly 1 week later, right, 28th of November 1920, Kilmichael ambush. 1 week later to the day, Tom Barry led 36 men of the 3rd West Cork Brigade to Kilmichael in County Cork. The auxiliaries had been passing through the area every week on their Crossley tender trucks, and they made a huge mistake. They never changed their route. They went the exact same route from Macroom to Bandon every single week. Kind of a silly move. And as of course, the IRA picked up on this route, right? So Tom Barry organised his men into 4 sections. They were all hidden by ditches, shrubbery and rocks. As the 2 auxiliary trucks arrived into Kilmichael that afternoon, Tom Barry instigated the fight by throwing a grenade at the first truck, immediately killing 2 men. The IRA opened fire, and after a gun battle broke out, it resulted in the IRA killing 17 Auxies. 17 of these elite force gone. It was a huge win for the IRA at the time, and it's probably the most famous and successful ambush in Irish history. Right, if we follow on then a couple of weeks after this, 11th and 12th of December 1920, the burning of Cork. Probably one of the most devastating acts by the Crown forces in the entire 2.5-year War of Independence. They set fire to the main streets of Cork City. 57 premises in the city centre were destroyed by fire. 20 were badly damaged. 12 were wrecked and looted. Luckily, there was no loss of life during the fires. However, approximately £2.5 million worth of damage was caused, and over 2,000 people lost their jobs. If we roll forward into 1921 then, the 10th of July, all recruiting of the auxiliaries was suspended. 11th of July, the truce, and the fighting ceased, right? 25th of October 1921. The recruiting for the Auxies recommenced, but only about 100 men were added before the withdrawal in 1922, January 1922. 25th of October 1921, the recruiting of the Auxies recommenced, but they only recruited about 100 men before the withdrawal in January 1922, after the Anglo-Irish Treaty was signed in December 1921. 16th of January 1922, the Auxies began to withdraw from Ireland. Companies were sent to Dublin, then they got on a boat to Holyhead, they handed in their weapons, and then dispersed to their homes. The Irish War of Independence was over, but the Civil War was just about to begin. So that's all from me today, lads. I hope that was a good description of who the auxiliaries were. I think it's important to know the differences between the Black and Tans and the Auxies, because they were two very different groups. I know they kind of had the same objective at the end of the day, but they were two very different groups, very different men involved, and it's nice to know the difference between them and not just lump them all under the Black and Tan name, because that's very common here, to just lump them all under the Black and Tan name. But anyways, I hope you enjoyed it. If there's anything I missed out on, make sure to comment below and let me know what that is, or drop a comment of what podcast you'd like next. Other than that, that's all from me. If you want early access to the podcast and all my videos, guys, you can get them on my Patreon, which I'll have linked below. Other than that, I'll see you in the next one. I hope you're having a great day. Talk to you later, lads.